Hello, everybody. Welcome to the IDDSI special webinar. Through thick and thin, we have two special people with us, Danielle Monica and Jennifer Raminick. They're at the Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is near Los Angeles, California. And it's a special presentation. They've done a lot of work to implement IDDSI, and they're here to share it with us. We're very fortunate to have them. When it comes to IDDSI, we're all in this together. So if you could please ask questions, you will notice on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to see a chat box there. And it's just like sending a text on your phone. And what will happen is I will get your questions. And then once the presentation is done, there's going to be time to ask Danielle and Jennifer some questions, and I'll ask them on your behalf. If you can please include the city and country that you're watching from, it's greatly appreciated. It's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome Danielle and Jennifer. Danielle Monica, she completed her master's degree at the California State University in Long Beach, California. She's been a therapist at the Children's Hospital of Orange County since 2016, where she assesses and treats infants and children in both acute, medical, and outpatient setting with a variety of feeding, swallowing, and communication disorders. Additionally, Danielle serves an important role in the multidisciplinary inpatient feeding program. She has presented both regionally and nationally on topics such as curriculum-based language intervention, word retrieval in individuals with dysphagia, and international dysphagia diet standardization initiative. Of course, us here with IDDSI. Her partner is Jennifer Raminick. She also completed her master's degree at California State University, Long Beach, California, and she recently earned her board-certified specialist certification in swallowing. She has also been a speech pathologist at the Children's Hospital in Orange County since 2013. She assesses and treats feeding and swallowing disorders as well. At the Children's Hospital, she revises the MBSS procedures to align with evidence-based best practice and lead a committee to implement the IDDSI initiative. She is a national and regional speaker, presenting regularly at California and American Speech Language Hearing Associations, their annual conferences, and she covers topics such as congenital laryngeal aspiration and pediatric lung and feeding on high-flow nasal cannula. She's also spoken at a pediatric dysphagia specialist to graduate and undergraduate students at the CSULB. We're heading to Orange County, California. Danielle and Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to share your efforts with us, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here today. And thank you so much to the CSNM for hosting us on this webinar. And thank you to the IDDSI board for organizing this and for all of your hard work. We're going to be presenting today on our process implementing IDDSI at our pediatric facility. So just to get some disclosures out of the way, we are both employed at CHOC Children's Hospital of Orange County and receive a salary, as well as Danielle and I both signed up on the IDDSI website to be champions and educate others. So here we are being champions. We have no other financial or non-financial obligations. Today we'd like to go over briefly previous dysphagia diets that we researched and quickly review IDDSI. Additionally, we want to discuss why it was important for us at our hospital to use a standardized dysphagia diet to create consistency among providers. And throughout our presentation, we'll be discussing some barriers we encountered during the implementation process and how we worked through those to find solutions. So we are a children's hospital in Orange County, California, which, like Dave said, is just south of Los Angeles. We are an acute care pediatric facility. We have a level 4 NICU, a pediatric ICU, cardiac ICU, a neuroscience unit, oncology unit, med-surg floors. We have about 314 beds in total, as well as an outpatient rehab facility and multiple on-site clinics. So here in Southern California, we are known for our sunshine, our beautiful beaches, and our traffic. So to tie into our presentation, we're going to be discussing some traffic jams we encountered during the implementation process, as well as some detours that we took to identify solutions. To quickly give you an overview of what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to talk about the importance of consistency in modified diets. We're going to be reviewing what we use here in the United States, the National Dysphagia Diet previously, and compare that to IDDSI. We're going to do a brief introduction to IDDSI and then really talk about how we established the need for change at our facility, how we worked with key players to implement the process, how we partnered with food service, and we're actually able to get into the kitchen to do some research and development on recipes, and how we implemented hospital-wide education in our transition process.
All right, so now on to our very first traffic jam here. Really, when Jen and I first identified that there were a lot of inconsistencies in the diet consistencies that we were currently using at our facility. So when I was in my fellowship year, I remember I was asking questions about an evaluation that we had done and our diet recommendations, and I realized that nobody was giving me the same answer. So one afternoon, everyone was in the office at the same time, and I said, okay, this is my chance. Guys, what consistency would you consider infant formula to be? You know, thin or half nectar? What do you think? Everyone was giving me different answers. So we definitely identified this as an area of improvement, and then our project was born. So why is this important? Why do we need to ensure consistencies? So very simply put, multiple labels increases the risk to patient safety. So this is from one of the articles that was put out by the IDDSI board. The more options and labels, the more room for inconsistency and possibly harmful user error. Other areas where consistency is important are patient care and then research. So what we've learned from our personal experience and also research is that consistencies vary not only between therapists and hospitals, but also nationally and internationally. So in short, consistency contributes to improved patient safety, better treatment outcomes, and then evolution of our field through consistent and replicable research. So a brief history of dysphagia diets. Early on in our field, there were really no precise viscosity categories or lists of foods falling into various viscosity categories. Jen and I did some research, and the earliest that we could find was in 1998. Logeman outlined the following consistencies, which were just thin liquids, thickened liquids, purees, and then thick foods, which included thickened liquids. So for those of you not in the United States, the NDD, or the National Dysphagia Diet, was the framework being widely used before IDDSI came along. So the National Dysphagia Diet Task Force published the National Dysphagia Diet, or the NDD, in 2002 with two main principles, and that was that they recommended terminology and then viscosity ranges for each category of liquid. So although the NDD was a great first step and a vital milestone, there was definitely further research needed. In the NDD guidebook, the authors themselves stated that the information reflected was an emerging science and that further research was needed. There were a couple drawbacks, particularly, for example, the lack of accessibility to valid measurements. So the viscosity categories were measured in centipoise, and you needed a viscometer, which is an expensive piece of lab equipment, not readily available in order to assess. There were also ambiguous terms for the solids, for example, mechanically altered versus advanced, and then poor reliability among therapists and poor carryover among caregivers.
So while we realized that there was a need for consistency with our dysphagia diets, the NDD was difficult to use and really difficult for patient carryover. So we attended a webinar much like this in 2016 and learned about IDDSI. The goal of IDDSI was to create global standardization of terminology and description of foods across ages, care settings, and cultures. So that sounded pretty ideal to us. IDDSI was established in 2013, and one of the things that we really loved about this was that all you needed to test your food or liquid were a syringe, a stopwatch, and basic kitchen utensils, and all the food and liquid can be tested in just 10 seconds or less. So here's the basic framework, and you can go on IDDSI.org. If you're still learning about IDDSI, they have some really great articles and resources. That's really about all we're going to talk about the framework, and we'll dive into our implementation process. So the first step for ourselves and for our staff was to just gain a lot of education. So we participated in webinars much like this one and read lots of articles and really spent a lot of time on the IDDSI.org website. We started with an in-service to our therapy staff to provide education so that we were all on the same page and all had a basic understanding of the need for change. We met with the managers of our rehab department, and we provided education to them about why we felt it was important to change our dysphagia diet. We led with a lot of stories that were published about choking and the need for consistency, and I think our managers were really bought in that we needed something better. We were really fortunate as well because we had great support from the clinical nutrition and lactation department of our hospital. Every department really understood it would be a great undertaking, but after we provided our rationale and our education, everyone was on board with the need for change. So our first traffic jam that we encountered was the inconsistency we had among therapists, among our own staff. So during our first educational in-service, we had all of the therapists in the same room and had a really great opportunity to get on the same page. So we asked the therapists how they would classify various food or liquids we use commonly in our facility. And we asked all of the therapists how they would classify liquids such as whole milk, various infant formulas, Pediatric, baby food, using the previous language of the NDD, so thin, nectar, chopped, pureed. We found that even with therapists at the same facility, we had so many different labels for the same foods and the same liquids. So right there, we had really established the need for change with our staff. So we took the opportunity during that same in-service and used the testing methods outlined with the IDDSI framework, and we used the syringe test or the flow test for the liquids, and we used the fork and spoon test for the solids. And we had a way to standardize those measurements. So this allowed us to get on the same page, since now we have an easily accessible way to test these foods and especially to test the liquids. And it provided an objective measure. It also was a really great way to introduce the IDDSI diet to our staff when they could actually use the measurements and use the classifications. Our whole staff really appreciated this dysphagia diet and how there was standardization, and it was very easy to implement.
All right, so I'll talk about our key players that we had on board here for our project. So all of our dysphagia therapists, so their role was to assess and recommend the modified diet and then provide education to the family. For our medical team, it was their job to change the diet order and then monitor ongoing patient safety. For our food service department, preparing and delivering foods according to the diet recommendations. For our clinical nutrition and lactation staff, it was to monitor the nutrition and hydration of the patients on their modified diets. For nursing, it was to thicken liquids at bedside and monitor ongoing patient safety and assisting with family education. And for the caregivers, also we wanted them to play a big role in preparing the food and feeding the patient according to our feeding team's recommendations, just as they would be doing at home. So another traffic jam here. We had some collaboration difficulties. So our implementation involved the most collaboration between our clinical nutrition and lactation department and our food service department. However, our food service department was without a director for several months during the early stages of the project. So to kind of make up for that, the therapists, Jen and I, identified and developed recipes ourselves. We got in the kitchen and kind of did some playing around with the blender and some testing, and we came up with recipes on our own. And then our clinical nutrition and lactation department was a really big help with assisting the kitchen with making the recipe book for the staff to know the recipes and then provide in-depth education on the food preparation and how it was actually prepared. So here's a beautiful picture of Jen and I in our hairnets in the kitchen. So we had challenges with our previous modified diet menu at our facility. So previously there was no recipes, so the consistencies varied based on who was cooking. Before you could get anything pureed on the menu. Refried beans, for example, one day they might be watery like a bean soup, and the next day they might be really a thick paste consistency, and it all varied based on who was cooking. So we knew that with creating our new menu, we wanted at first to keep to limited options. We have about 10 to 15 food items for each consistency, for each solid consistency. And we're kind of starting small for now, but once we get that down really well, we do plan to expand. And with the help of our clinical nutrition and lactation department, as we previously stated, we created a recipe book for food service with step-by-step pictures and instructions that also shows how the final project should look. Product should look, excuse me. We wanted to make all the recipes very simple, so most of our recipes have 3 ingredients or less.
So again, here we are in the kitchen. We had a really great time just creating some of these different items, and we really got to just get in the kitchen and throw some things in the blender and test how they came out, and this included how they tasted and what the consistency looked like. Our level 3 liquidized, there's some menu examples there of items that we have, and you can see at the bottom an example of the recipe that we created. So with the cooked carrots, it was cooked carrots and 1.5 cups of vegetable broth, which left about 9 cc's in the flow test, and then we also tested it with the fork and the spoon test as well. Here are some examples of our level 4 puree items from our kitchen. You can see the picture is of the mac and cheese, which we created with 1 cup of our hospital's mac and cheese and 3 tablespoons of milk. And again, we have just a few items. This is an example of the items that we have, but we have about 10 items on each of these consistencies menus so that we can do small things well.
Okay, so for the level 5 minced and moist, so this was by far the most difficult recipe category to develop because of the small pediatric 2 millimeter bite size. So we know with adults the bite size can be 1.5 centimeters, but for pediatrics, the 2 millimeter bite size, if you think about a green pea, that's about 2 millimeters. So that is very small. So we ended up using a food processor to make the small pieces, and we'll explain a little bit more when we get to that in a moment.
And so just to clarify, a piece of quinoa is about 2 centimeters.
Yes, sorry, not a pea, a piece of quinoa. So here is a picture here of some of the items in our food processor. I think on the left here, we have some roasted turkey, which we were pulsing for our turkey and gravy. And then on the right here, we have quinoa and pesto, which is one of our food items. Okay, so for our level 6 soft and bite size, so excuse me, this is where I should be talking here about the 8 millimeter bite size and then the adult 1.5 centimeter bite size. So here are some of the items that we did put onto our menu. The tool that we use to cut into the pediatric 8mm bite size, that was a bit of a challenge to find, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So that was our next traffic jam. We knew we needed a tool to make the bite size. We wanted to create uniformity and really reduce the chance of user error when chopping by hand. So we knew we needed to find a tool for both levels 5 and 6, so to make the minced and moist and the soft and bite size levels. So for minced and moist, we ended up using a food processor, and a few pulses in the food processor really got the right consistency. We learned that only drier foods worked, for example, meats and pastas, because the wet foods like fruits and vegetables ended up just turning into a puree. Our dietitian, one of our dietitians gave us a great idea to use the Gerber Stage 2 fruits and vegetables as sauces for the level 5 menu. For example, one of our favorite food items is Gerber banana puree that's mixed with some pulsed shortbread cookies. So that's a really delicious one. For the level 6, we searched high and low for a chopper, but the best we could find was an as seen on TV device called the Nicer Dicer. It is plastic and not very durable, but it does the job, and hopefully as we progress there will be more options to help us get that small bite size. Most foods could go in the chopper, but they still had to be sliced beforehand. So for example, a banana, we have to slice that long ways before we can put it through the Nicer Dicer to prevent the cubes from being too long.
And another thing we found with the Nicer Dicer, and Danielle mean that we searched high and low to find some sort of tool. The Nicer Dicer size grate that we put it through was actually 6mm, and the pediatric bite size is 8mm, but we found out that it was 6mm when you squished and pushed the food through, but once the food actually came out, it expanded to the 8mm bite size.
So here are some examples of that recipe book that we were talking about. So this was put together by one of our wonderful dietitians. So this is an example of the book that our food service department will pull off the shelf and open up when they get a modified diet order. We have also been in talks with our management about having this be available possibly to families whose children are discharged home from the hospital on a modified diet. But we have some tweaking to do because most of the recipes are made to yield a larger amount because of our industrial size blenders. So we'll have to pare it down a little bit in the future. All right, so education was definitely one of the biggest pieces of this project, really getting all of our key players on board. So our first level of education was to our dysphagia therapists. So as Jen mentioned, we held multiple IDDSI in-services to our staff. We also created an online education module, almost like a little webinar, brief webinar online that all of our staff had to complete. And then we also gave monthly updates about our rollout plan and discussed them at our discipline-specific rounds. So with our physicians, we made sure to include our residents and attendings and also our GI physicians. Our GI physicians, we gave a little bit more detailed information to. We knew they'd be encountering this with their patients on a daily basis. Our modes of education, we provided in-services in person. We did a brief little presentation at their monthly rounds. And then we also created a little hot sheet, which at our facility is just like a little one-page piece of paper that tells you all the pertinent information that you need to know about a new change that's being rolled out. So for our nursing staff, we went into work at 5 o'clock in the morning on many a day to target our night shift. We targeted day and night shift, and we did in-services for all units of our hospital with a hands-on flow test lab. At our facility, we have nurses thicken liquids at the bedside, so we knew that was really important for nursing to be able to feel comfortable implementing this. We also created that same online education module that we assigned to our dysphagia therapists was assigned to all of our unit nurses, and then GI, pulmonary, and neurology clinic nurses. We also provided the IDDSI flow test posters to hang in the unit kitchen area so that if anyone was stuck, there would be a quick how-to posted there. So for our food service, we thought it would be more impactful to give a little in-service to them on the purpose of modified diets and the impact of food preparation on patient safety, and really why it's important if the puree is too thin or too thick. Our clinical nutrition and lactation and director of food service provided direct staff food preparation training for each recipe after Jen and I developed them. And then, as we said, our wonderful dietitian made that recipe book for us with step-by-step preparation instructions and photos of how the final product should look. So IDDSI has done a lot of the work for us. There are a multitude of resources on the IDDSI website. This is the flow test poster here on the right that we actually printed and posted in all of our nursing units for the nurses to use. So there's a whole lot of great information on the website.
And I think another really neat moment in the implementation process for us is when we did meet with our GI physicians. They were excited about IDDSI and excited that we would have a way to standardize and test liquids and foods that were, but they had a lot of questions. And so they said to us, you know, you're going to need to provide information sheets with pictures so it's really easy for caregivers. And we said, yep, we already have that. IDDSI has it on their website. They said, well, you're going to need to provide this in multiple languages. And we said, yep, we already have that. IDDSI has it on their website. So it was really great for us to use the resources that were already provided, and it really took a lot of the load off of us as therapists implementing this. So in our transition period, one of the big questions that we had, you know, we had plans to go live with this, but we had spent a lot of time educating our staff, and everybody was really bought in that they wanted to use this language and be more consistent. But we didn't have any of the commercial-based products yet. We didn't have our charting updated in our medical records. So we actually contacted the board at that point and said, what should we do? And they were gracious enough to get back to us and explain to us that we would be using transitional language during the implementation period. So in our charting and in all of our documentation, we would say things like nectar thick liquid / mildly thick level 2. We're super excited because we're starting to see some of the commercial adoption to IDDSI, and I think we saw a Simply Thick packet the other day come through that had the IDDSI language on it. So things are starting to really come along, and I think this is going to make it a lot easier during the transition period. So the last traffic jam that we encountered was just our timeline. So we had really high hopes that remember I said November 2016, we watched this amazing webinar. I think Peter gave the webinar, and we talked about it with our rehab staff by the end of the year. And we had big plans to go live in July 2017. And that didn't happen. And then we had big plans to go live in August and then in mid-September. And we finally went live with our IDDSI implementation on November 7th, 2017. We had a lot of unexpected events that kind of pushed back our timeline. So we had JCO visit, we had some of our key players go into early preterm labor and go on maternity leave, we had employee turnover. So there were quite a few things out of our control that just really made us have a fluid timeline. I think one of the tips that we can give to you is we thought naively as therapists and not as computer people that we could just easily update our electronic medical records, and that turned out to be a 2-day project with 18 pages of changes that we needed in our electronic documents. So hopefully that tip helps you a little bit as well. I think the biggest advice that we can give is just to be flexible, that this does take time. It's a really big undertaking, and there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of parties involved. But one of the really neat things that came out of this is just the collaboration we built between our departments, between rehab and food service and nutrition. I think taking this on together was a really big project, but a project that allowed us to grow in a lot of ways, just not just in our dysphagia diets. So hopefully our detours here helped make your road to change a little bit smoother. And we can go ahead and give you guys our contact information if you have questions about implementation or have questions that are specific to your facility. We'd be happy to answer those for you. Our email is here at the bottom. And I think we can open it up to some questions.
Danielle, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Firstly, I want to congratulate you on all of the efforts that you make to help the children. I know in my own career, I've never been more touched and yet inspired by all of the heroes in our children's hospitals, not just here in Canada, of course, but around the world. So I congratulate you in helping those heroes. And I want to thank you, of course, for what you've done for them through IDDSI and all of the efforts, you know, that you've made, not just doing it, but to share with us through this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, before I get to questions, I do have a lot of people that have asked if you would be willing to share your slides with us. And I was wondering if we can, if the best location would be on the IDDSI website. I'll post it on everybody's chat box. So I thought I'd ask if you'd be willing to share your slides on the website for everybody after the webinar.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I'm going to post that in the chat box in just a second so people have a chance to click on the link. Get to our questions. And there's a lot of people that are asking questions, and I'll let everybody know when we get to the top of the hour. I realize people have dining rooms to attend to, and we'll stay as long as we can here. The first question is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Standardization is key, but our population is full of picky eaters. How is compliance with patients addressed? For example, quinoa and pesto sounds great, and it looks interesting.
Yeah, quinoa and pesto is not our top seller on our menu, but we have used a lot of foods that are favorites among our picky eaters. We have pancakes, we have mac and cheese.
Yeah, we do have a pretty good variety, so I think that helps the patients find something, at least one or two items that they would like.
And a lot of what we do too is just education. So if we can educate a parent on how to create these consistencies, then they don't necessarily need to use our specialized diet, especially going home. We're an acute hospital, so a lot of times our patients aren't here for an extended period of time. So we educate the parents on how to do this at home and how to test the foods so that they can give them their favorites in a safe way.
Okay, thank you. I know it's an interesting question, and as we have an international audience here as well, and I know, like, say for example, all our friends over there in the United Kingdom watching, and they put, you know, kippers and scones and things like that on their menus, and it's really interesting to see the variety of foods we have around the world.
Absolutely.
From London, England. Oh gosh, I lost it here. Was wondering what the response and reaction was from the kitchen staff about these recipes. Do they feel it was more work, took away from their autonomy, or were pleased to have something more uniform to use? You know, and I really appreciate this question, because a lot of times when it comes to implementing something new, such as IDDSI, it's a big, very important and a wonderful you know, implementation for us to do. A lot of times there can be fear, and a lot of times it can be some people don't adapt to change or even have the time frames. So dealing with staff must have not been the easiest thing to do. I appreciate this question.
Yeah, so I think that is a really good question. And if I'm being honest, I think to answer your question, it was a little bit of both. At first, I think there was a little bit of apprehension, but the way that we really battled that was through our education. As we said, we had a specific in-service for our food service staff where we explained to them specifically why this was important. So it wasn't just that we were making recipes that everybody had to follow. We really brought it back to the patients and the children, and we talked a lot about, choking or aspiration and what that really means, and how the way that the food is prepared can contribute to that, and really went more in depth on the patient side and kind of explained things. And I think in the end they found it more helpful because they had a recipe to follow, and I think they also saw that foods were coming out the same every time and more consistent. And I think that helped to get their buy-in as well. Do you have anything to add, Jen?
I think too, another thing that really worked out in our favor was timing. So as Danielle stated earlier in our webinar, is that when we brought this on board, we had a new food service director. So really everything in our kitchen was kind of different and changing. And so it was a little frustrating for the staff because it was one more thing that they had to change and get on board with. But I think in the end, they really did value the ease of it. Like I said, none of the recipes had more than 3 ingredients, and that there was consistency, that it was just easy to follow. But we did meet some apprehension in the beginning. I think
we all are going to.
We met some apprehension as well when we were in the kitchen with the kitchen staff. And I think this is how it all started as well, is because we were in there just saying, can we have another cup of noodles? Can we have another cup of beans? And I think that's when they started asking questions like, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? And so it helped lay the foundation.
I think another thing to add, though, like Jen was saying, this project, the collaboration really helped in so many ways, even outside of the project. So, the kitchen staff got used to seeing our faces in the kitchen, and now they know Jen and I, and, we'll say hello to each other. They ask us questions, if we pass them in the elevator about a specific, menu item that they want to know. So now we really have a direct line with the kitchen and the workers. So I think that that's really helped as well.
Thank you very much for asking. We're all in this together, and we're all, going to face the same challenges. And I kind of feel bad that you two are kind of led the whole way for all of us. But thank you very much for sharing that with us as we prepare. In case people are wondering, this webinar is being recorded. And if you need to use this session as a teaching guide for your staff, it will be posted on the IDDSI website. And I did post their link in the chat box for everybody. The next question is from Chicago. Have you found any products that are using IDDSI standards to help simplify and get consistent products every time?
So there are quite a few commercial products out there. I know the Hormel line of pureed foods really follows the IDDSI guidelines for the pureed diet menu. We wanted to be able to use our own foods here. Our kitchen and our nutrition department really, really has a lot of pride in, we create a lot of our own food and we create a lot of our own recipes. So we didn't have the option of using the pre-made items, but they are available. I know a lot of facilities are using them and having success with them. I think going back to the first question about the picky eating, we didn't feel like it would be that great for our pediatric population, and felt like we needed to come up with menu items that looked like our menu, at least on the normal non-dysphagia diet menu.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Trumbull, Connecticut. What is the age range for using the pediatric measurements versus adult? Is it based on age or body weight and size?
That is a good question.
Those guys play hardball out there, don't they?
Yeah.
That might be a question for Peter or Julie.
I'm sorry, I lost that answer. I'm sorry.
I said that might be a good one for Peter or Julie to answer.
Okay, we'll stand by for them. I know they're listening in. on the call as well. So Peter and Julie, if you guys are able to chime in on that question in a second or two, just come into the webinar. We'll move on to another question. I'm sure I'll hear from them in a minute. From Pembroke, Ontario.
Dave, it's Julie speaking.
Oh, hi, Julie.
Hi.
Julie's
Thank you.
Brisbane, Australia. She's also a co-chair with Peter Lamb. So good evening to you out there in Australia.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the question around, when do we switch over from the pediatric sizes across to the adult sizes? The sizes were developed based on tracheal size and choking risk. So as the infants get bigger, basically, I guess we're looking at children probably until they're sort of around about sort of 10-ish. But, again, you need to be looking at size. So if you've got someone quite small, then you're looking at those smaller sizes as they get bigger. And this is something, I guess, that you could also talk with your otolaryngologists or ear, nose and throat doctors about if you're concerned about where the switchover point might be.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. From Pembroke, Ontario, Canada. Did you work on the development full-time where you provided additional funding for the development?
Jen and I definitely, IDDSI became a part of our sleeping, eating, and breathing. We kind of found a way to fit it in. Jen and I both work inpatient, so our schedules are a little more flexible. So on days where we had less patient care loads, we were able to work on the project. And then there were definitely many a night where we, had dinner together and met after work to work on things. And no, we were not compensated additional besides our normal salary.
We did have a few hours a month built in through, we have a clinical practice committee, and this was a project that our hospital felt was being taken under the clinical practice committee. And so we did have a few extra hours a week to dedicate to this, but oftentimes it was a lot of our own personal time.
Yeah, it's a commitment and a sacrifice. Well, of course, Julie and Peter have started it. They're all volunteers, but we're so grateful for you to go through all of that effort, plus to share with us, to help us, not to have to go through all of that effort. So we're really grateful for you to do this for us. We really are. The next question is from Houston, Texas. This is Children's Hospital as well. How do you deal with thickening for infants, not preterm?
Whew, we could do a whole webinar on thickening for infants. Our facility is currently looking at our thickeners that we used. So in the past, we've used rice cereal, and then we've used oat cereal. We are starting to look at some of the non-food based. So we're starting to look at gel mix, and we're starting to look at thick and clear, but we are still in the process.
Okay, thank you. From Woodstock, New Brunswick. We were wondering if the recipe book that the dietitian made is available for sharing. We are in a long-term care facility, and some of the recipes would work well with our menu. Actually, I also wanted to mention that we're going to be doing a special presentation with IDDSI based on long-term care facilities as well. That'll be coming up probably in the next couple months too. But this question for the recipe book, I'm not sure, I can't remember the name of the dietitian that wrote it for us.
For our recipe book, we'd be happy to share that. We do say use it with caution because we have our own foods that we use here and our own way that we prepare them. So it may not be a direct translation when using them in your own kitchens, but you have all the tools through IDDSI to implement and test the foods that you've created. So yes, we would be happy in sharing our recipes.
Yeah, there is a lot of people that are asking for your your recipe book here.
Mm-hmm. And I will say too, our recipes were created with our industrial kitchen equipment. So like Danielle was saying, like our carrots yields about 3 cups of carrots pureed, which is not realistic for one single person to eat unless they really like carrots. But so it might be something that you need to work with on portions and playing around with it. But just to give you an idea of what we used and how we created those recipes, we'd be happy to share.
Thank you. From Manchester, England, have the pharmacies been on board with providing medication with IDDSI descriptors?
So that is a great question. I don't think that we have had that come up before.
The short answer is no, but it is a great thought.
We'll have to look into that one a little more.
From Iowa, does IDDSI offer food recipes to make the transition easier? We know you folks have the recipe books as well. I don't know if IDDSI's involved in recipe development. That might be a question for...
Yeah, I was going to say...
yeah, Peter Lamb from Canada. Thank you for that question. The answer to that question, we're apologizing by saying no, we will not be offering recipes because the initiative is international in nature. We are offering testing guidelines and principles around the properties and behavior of foods that hopefully will guide people in different regional areas and different culinary backgrounds to then be able to develop their own recipes to meet those ideal food properties and food behaviors based on the standards and the descriptors that have been published. So we applaud the work of those who are in the process of testing the menu items, the recipes, and we encourage you to share that with people that are in similar practice settings as yourselves. We hope to be able to connect people in the very near future so that the sharing of experiences and wisdom can begin.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, again, Danielle and Jennifer, I mean, what you have done and as an example for all of us is greatly appreciated. And we're all in this together. We learn from you and your example. And like Peter said, as we go along, we'll keep sharing with one another to make this work and to make it easier and better for those who are starting out with it. But it's a wonderful thing that you folks have done in sharing with us. From Pearland, Texas, can you please speak to your plans to maintain nursing and food and nutrition staff competency on an annual basis? And I really like this question as well, of course, all the questions, but none of us can achieve our goals as managers without the staff. And so I really appreciate how you keep everybody abreast every year.
Absolutely. So we definitely plan to do the nursing education annually, and it is part of their onboarding. So as new nurses are hired, they will have to take the module, the online module that we created that will explain IDDSI and how to do the flow test, since the nursing staff is going to be thickening liquids at bedside. With our staff as well, any new rehab dysphagia therapist has to take the online module as well. In our food and kitchen staff, we are still working on how we're going to have ongoing education. We just rolled this out in November, so it's still pretty fresh and we're still gathering. We did some initial testing and then we're going to be looking at outcome measures. So as we have our outcome measures within our facility, that will allow us to see kind of how it's going and what areas still need education. And I think that will help provide a good framework for what the education will look like going forward.
Okay. From Ottawa, Canada, how did you deal with no bread on the soft and bite size in the adult population? We are having issues with variety as we outsource our food. I appreciate
Well, I
you
think
sharing that. You know, it's nice they're having this issue, and it's nice we can talk about it here.
I think by default, we had no bread on our soft and bite-sized menu because we needed it to go through the nicer dicer, which wouldn't, if we put bread in, it would get stuck. So having this silly product of the nicer dicer actually was a good way for us to test whether foods actually met the criteria in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think I want to hand this over to Peter and Julie, because I remember we took their IDDSI short course at the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Convention in November. And I believe they did show us a way to make bread that one of their chefs had come up with. Is that right, Peter and Julie?
Thank you. Yes, we have been working with a number of different groups right now to just polish up that procedure and recipe around how to chop up regular bread and to be able to put it into a sandwich form that will meet both the level 5 minced and moist as well as level 6 soft and bite size. We can appreciate the fact that in a lot of North American and Western diet settings that, you know, sandwiches are a predominant part of the diet. If we can just make 2 comments around the use of sandwiches. One of them is around the fact that if you currently have someone who can manage to orally process bread and do it safely, we do not suggest that just because you switch over to the IDDSI terminology that you discontinue that person's use of sandwiches and bread. However, the soft and bite size level is actually created to accommodate those who do not have that oral processing and oral coordination, and the size of the particle size that is recommended, the 15 millimeter by 15 millimeter for adults and 8 millimeter by 8 millimeter for pediatrics, is really meant for choking prevention. So there is another side to the provision of these diet texture levels, and that is the clinician assessment and discretion to be able to say, will they or will they not be able to manage these? And if not, then we need to then look at the appropriate textural levels for them. We know that there is a group in Canada currently working on, well, what about those who can manage, you know, a more regular type diet, but they just need the foods to be soft. And so they are working on what do we have that as a naming scheme, just because people have, you know, less dentition, mild chewing issues, but it's not really a dysphagia related issue that is causing them to need something softer for oral processing. And that group is going to agree on some kind of consensus that they can use in the long-term care setting. All we ask people to do is, if the food does not meet the IDDSI detailed definition, then please do not call it an IDDSI level, and you know, only call it an IDDSI level texture or liquid thickness if it meets those testing levels, so that we can have consistency in communication, as Jennifer and Danielle have shared about how important that is with regards to having effective and safe communication.
Thank you, Peter.
Dave, can I?
Sorry, Julie.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well? It's also possible, I guess, with the IDDSI diets to do combinations. So you may have someone who might be on level 7 for some of the items, but perhaps you might choose to give them, you know, level 5 meat, for example, that's how you get around that that choking risk. So being able to mix and match the different levels is a possibility. Obviously would need some further discussions with food service. And just to clarify as well, there is data to show that people who have reduced dentition don't chew their food as well, and it is in fact a choking risk. So just to be mindful of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm going to post on the chat boxes for everybody the email addresses for Jennifer and Danielle. They put a lot of time and effort into this, and if you folks have questions for them, I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you, or if you want to send them a thank you email for all they've done for us. We are running towards the top of the hour, and I do want to ask people if there's a very short survey after this webinar is finished. You know, these webinars are, you know, we'll go over time here, but there's many hours put into the preparation of this webinar. So if you could please complete the survey, it only takes a minute or two, and give us the feedback, and I will be passing that back on to the IDDSI board, and of course Danielle and Jennifer. That'd be greatly appreciated. So it is getting the top of the hour. If people have dining room commitments, I wanted to remind you of that. Now, Danielle, Jennifer, you guys okay to keep going for a few minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. From Lexington, Virginia, we mostly see adults. We currently have menus only in what is now a regular consistency. Menu development in each of these areas has begun. Did any of the recipes you developed address these other dietary restrictions? I'll tell you, if you guys publish your book, you probably make the New York Times bestseller list.
So as far as other dietary restrictions, as far as like gluten-free or dairy-free?
Yeah, that's a challenge we're probably all going to run into as well.
We do have some of the menu. So in each of our menus, we have a vegetarian option. We have items that are created without dairy, and we have items that are gluten-free. It doesn't mean we have a lot of them. Like I said, our menus are really small to start with, and this is something when we expand our menu, we really want to look into. But we actually do have quite a few items that are gluten-free just because the gluten products didn't yield well when we had to modify them.
From Nova Scotia, Canada, do you have any trouble with starches becoming gummy after preparation, or any issues with changes in consistency with different temperatures, such as hot holding or chilled? I really like that question as well too, because it can change as it sits, and and some starches don't have the same consistency as others when we try to modify it.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great lead-in question from the last one. So yes, we did find that a lot of the bread-like products became very gummy. So when we would put like French toast or pancakes in a food processor or a blender, we did have, it became very sticky. So sometimes we had to not use those products, or we had to come up with a good recipe that eliminated the stickiness of it. Also, we use rice as a thickener for some of our soups to create a more pureed consistency versus a liquidized consistency. And with the rice, it does get thicker as it sits. So if you test it right on the line, like if I pick the tray up right then and I test it, it does seem like it's quite a bit thin, but by the time I get it up to the patient's room, it is thickened to the correct consistency.
Okay, thank you. From Cincinnati, Ohio, since IDDSI has been implemented a few months, were there any bumps in the road during the first few weeks, or any unexpected outcomes?
Funny enough, the first week it was implemented, Danielle and I were at a conference presenting on our implementation process. So we were gone for the first week of implementation.
I don't think that we've had any major hiccups. I think we did run into one situation where a resident accidentally put in one of our old diet orders, so from the National Dysphagia Diet Framework, and Jen and I didn't even know that those were still in the computer to be able to put in, so that was something that we had to follow up with our Information Services Department, or ISD, about taking the old diet orders out. So that was kind of like a technical thing. But I don't know. I don't think we've come across any other big hiccups. I think it's, knock on wood, it's been pretty smooth so far.
I think the biggest hiccups were just the technical issues. I think we had some glitches in our system where we had to clarify a liquid diet and a solid diet, even if they were cleared for all liquids. So that was just something that we had to learn on as we went along.
Okay. Next question is from Belgium. In the making of this book of recipes, did you consider the problems of certain people? For example, people with Parkinson's or other illnesses?
In creating the recipe book, so we, at our pediatric facility, we considered the diagnoses that we see typically in children, and I think we address those in creating our recipe book, but it is not necessarily universal for adults as well.
Yeah, as all of us get going and we keep sharing with each other as we learn, and different, different illnesses or people that have different health problems. It's interesting as we share together, we'll pick up on a lot of little things that'll make a big difference. From Toronto, can mixed consistencies be used?
Yes, so we have in our charting, we have mixed consistencies, but that would be at like a level 7. So they would have to be cleared for all consistencies before they can have mixed consistencies.
From North Carolina, can you tell us more about IDDSI testing with liquids and how you applied that to your patient population? Would like to hear more about breast milk, formula, thin and thickened fluids.
So I think this is one of the greatest tools that IDDSI has given us, is the flow test, because at least at our facility, we didn't have a on-hand viscometer, so we weren't able to test liquids. So a lot of it was just holding it up and saying, yeah, that looks thick enough. But now we have the flow test, which you can go on the IDDSI.org website, and they have some great videos on how to do the flow test and what the flow test looks like for each consistency. I think the flow test helped us so much because we had such variability, even just among our own staff, of, well, breast milk is a very thin liquid and formula is a slightly thickened liquid. And this just allowed us to get an objective measure. And we have found that there are variations between breast milk, between formulas, between increased calorie formulas, and it's very hard to standardize. I think that was one of the things that was asked of us previously, to come up with every formula and what the flow test yield was. And there's just so many variables that it's impossible to do, but we all have the flow test. We can all do that in our own treatments with each patient, and then we have something objective there. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. From Scotland, are you using a commercial thickener to get the correct consistency? I know you mentioned using rice in certain foods, and I know we use breads and instant mashed potatoes sometimes in different recipes at our home. Do you stick to a lot of commercial products? So
for our liquids, like we said, are thickened at the bedside. So when someone orders something, the thickener packet gets sent up from the kitchen, and then the nurse has to go to our kitchen on the unit, on the floors, and grab the beverage, and then they thicken at the bedside. So for our liquids, we have a commercial thickener that we use. We use Simply Thick. But for the recipes themselves, like the pureed level 4, we used all foods. So like Jen said, if we could use rice to thicken, I think that was what we used most.
Rice and pasta.
Rice and pasta, yeah, but we used all foods for the solid foods. The only time we use the commercial thickener is for liquids.
Great, thank you very much. From Vancouver, congratulations on your implementation. I think that comes from all of us. Have you had any feedback from parents and caregivers on using IDDSI, and how has it been received? That's a good question too, because a lot of times when there's change and rumors get out, caregivers are also a big, a very important group of people that we communicate, and we are responsible, to let them know what we're up to. So that's a very good question, what the parents or other caregivers have to say about it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we've gotten a lot of good feedback specifically from other therapists and then also from parents. So Jen and I have had a lot of our therapists approach us and just say, oh my gosh, thank you guys so much. This is so great. It's so great to have this objective measure. I think the therapists really like it. I think for both the therapists and the parents, it makes them feel empowered. Like they, have some real objective information in front of them that they can work with. I can think of 3 families actually recently that we've helped them use the flow test and learn it with their infants. And, having a young child that struggles with a swallowing issue is a very stressful situation. So to be able to provide some consistency through an objective measure where they're able to, do exactly what their child needs, I think has been very empowering for a lot of our parents. And we have heard that from them, that they really like the system.
I think to piggyback on that, I actually just worked with a patient yesterday, and she is a 3-month-old infant with a type 1 laryngeal cleft. And we found that in the swallow study, and then we were able to test different consistencies going up using the flow test, testing 1 millimeter at a time with the flow test of thickness. So we found that using the flow test, if she had 4 millimeters left in the syringe, so it came out to be a thinner level 2, that she had a safe swallow. And previously her mom was terrified. She was terrified to feed her kid. She was terrified to take her home. And then we were able to do this. We were able to test it. We were able to test it at the bedside. And it was a safe way to feed her kid. And she said, I just feel so much better knowing that I can replicate this at home, and I know what I'm giving her is safe. And I don't know that we would have had that previously.
No.
Thank you. This next question is from Iowa City. And I appreciate them asking this. There's some confusion. Is there pediatric IDDSI guidelines and adult IDDSI guidelines? We are not finding anything. So is there different guidelines between adults and children?
So there's different measurements as far as standardization. So like Danielle said, with the minced and moist for pediatric, the piece size is 2 millimeters. I actually don't know offhand what it is for adults. And then the soft and bite-sized piece is 8 millimeters for pediatric. And there are, this is on if you go to the IDDSI website, and they have a large document that details all of the requirements for each food, and then it details how to test it. So it says if you're going to test it using the fork test, here's what it should look like. If you're going to test with the spoon test, this is what it should look like. If you're going to use the syringe or the flow test, this is what it should look like.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to mention, this is from Peter and Julie, that there's a lot of good information. When you go to the IDDSI website and you look under resources, there's an IDDSI audit tool section there. And if you go to that part, it's also going to help us with some of the questions. They've done a lot of work at IDDSI on the board, and there's a lot of great information on their website.
Dave, thank you very much for mentioning that. Just for the audience, the IDDSI website, the resources section actually has now been reorganized so that the tools are much easier to find. For those who have not seen the audit tools that IDDSI has developed, we do encourage that you go to the IDDSI resources page on our website and look under implementation There will be more tools to be made available very, very shortly. We develop these tools based on demands and suggestions from the world audience. So if anybody would like to share a tool with anyone else in the world, if you've developed some really, really good materials that you think would be helpful, please, by all means, send it in to us, and we would be most happy to acknowledge you for it. We are looking forward to sharing more stories about implementation with the global audience. Dave, thank you very much for mentioning the fact that we have some upcoming webinars, and we will also have some forums that we will be holding in the near future where we do entertain questions such as the question period now, so that we can help everyone along in the implementation journey. And so on that note, Dave, may we take the opportunity to thank you for being such an amazing moderator from on behalf of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, and to thank behind the scenes the person we don't often see, Anthony, who is our tech genius, to make this webinar happen. And then most of all, thank you to Danielle and Jennifer for the amazing work and the championing spirit that they took with this project. Just as every one of us, contribute towards the journey of IDDSI and global implementation, we appreciate the fact that not all of us have, the wonderful opportunities and extra hours or, extra paid staff. And all of us are doing this off the side of our desk. And if we could just, once again, with the warmest thanks, say to you that thank you to contributing to improving patient safety. That is our primary goal of IDDSI. And we look forward to working with all of you together, and look forward to talking to you and seeing you in the next webinar.
Thank you
so much, Peter.
Okay, everybody, we're going to close, and we're going to send you to your surveys. Thank you again, Danielle and Jennifer. It's been a real pleasure.
Dave, if I could just clarify one thing before we end here. So Jen and I created a separate email for all of the IDDSI questions. So it's right here on our closing slide at the bottom, IDDSI-PEDSchampions@gmail.com. So if you could direct all questions to that email, that would be fantastic. We'd be happy to help.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for giving out the wrong email address. I hope it wasn't.
Oh, that's okay. It's okay.
No problem.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And wherever you are in the world, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.